This is Matt Renner reporting from Winter Soldier in Silver Spring, Maryland. Today I sat down with Logan Laturi to speak with him about his faith and how it affected his experience in Iraq and as a veteran.
I told myself I was a Christian basically my whole life, and I came to see that that faith obligates me to nonviolence. I applied to be a conscientious objector. I asked my unit, my commander specifically, that to return to Iraq without a weapon, I asked to be a non-combatant. And through the process of being a CO and having an interview with the psychiatrist, I was given diagnosis of maladjustment disorder because every soldier is trained to be an infantryman first. So the idea of a soldier going to battle without a weapon is incomprehensible.
You testified on a panel about the rules of engagement. During your testimony, you spoke about your faith. Can you tell me more about that?
A lot of my discomfort going into Iraq, because I had called myself a Christian, was the religious language that was used to justify the war. I never quite felt on board with that. And as I began to study the Bible a lot more intimately and personally, I realized that that isn't what the Bible is talking about. I've always told people that, to me, my CO application wasn't an application, it was a declaration. This is who I was and this is what I believe. And the federal government may recognize it, or they may not, but that won't change who I am.
And you actually wanted to serve in combat, but
that's correct,
as an unarmed non-combatant.
That's correct. It was at that point that I was told that I had lied to my psychiatrist, that I had some grand scheme to get out of the Army. Even though it was clear in my packet and to the psychiatrist, I don't want to leave my unit at all. And I was told that I had, quote, gotten what I had wanted. I was immediately reassigned to another unit.
Your unit then redeployed without you, is that right?
I watched from the balcony of staff duty as guys were saying goodbye to their family. The buses had come, and I remember looking down at my first sergeant and wishing more than anything that he'd understood what I really wanted. So it was a conundrum for me because I felt very strongly that Christians can serve their country, but they first and foremost must serve the God that they worship. And the God that I worship is nonviolent. Grace exceeds justice. At the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, my battalion commander, after 3 weeks in the box at Fort Irwin, sat my company down for a pep talk, and he made it explicitly clear that if there was a problem and the wrong person went down, we would plant weapons to ensure that you guys are protected.
In your testimony, you talked about your commander briefing your unit and saying that your unit would cover up civilian deaths by using drop weapons. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, the terminology wasn't used, but he did make it expressly clear that if the wrong person went down, that he would make sure that he had our best interest in mind. And it was couched in language that was very much, I'm here to protect you, I'm here for you. But the reality was that he was willing to commit a crime in order to give his own soldiers immunity, essentially is what we're talking about. That we are immune to the moral ramifications of what we're doing.
And how did this play out actually on the street in Iraq?
I didn't end up deploying with that commander. That was the commander that I would have had my second deployment under. In June or July of '07, just recently, after he'd given that speech at the National Training Center, two of his unit members came under Article 32 charges, which are similar to a grand jury. They were charged with premeditated murder in an instance where a sergeant first class or an E7 shot a detainee and then ordered an E4 specialist to do the same. And I think that case is still pending, but the significance to me for that is that the atmosphere existed. Signal, shout, show, shove, shoot. And that was the extent of what our ROE was on a running basis. The golden rule, one that we could always count on, was that if you feel threatened, don't hesitate to use your weapon if you feel it's necessary. So that was our license. If something occurred, we could always say that we were threatened. And I think that I observed that a couple of times with other members of my unit.
A lot of people on the panel talked about the general attitude towards the civilian population of Iraq. What would you say the general attitude was, and how did this affect the interactions between the U.S. forces and the civilian population?
I lived with our platoon interpreter for about a month and a half, I think, during the time that we were in Kirkuk for a while. And it was the first time that I really understood Iraqis as human beings, like, oh, these guys have lives. He was a graduate of Mosul University, had an engineering degree, had served in the Iraqi National Guard, or the Republican Guard. He was working with Americans who were seen as an occupying force by the time we left. When we had immediately gotten there, I don't think that sentiment really had solidified yet. I think they were still very friendly and sympathetic towards us. But by the time we left, they were collaborators with the enemy. I began wondering what it must have felt like to walk through one's own country and watch foreigners shoot and kill or run over my own countrymen, and the significant emotional turmoil that probably brought him, and knowing that his family was still living there, and they couldn't tell their neighbors that he was working. They had to tell them that he was dead. I think he was promised extradition when he was done working with the Americans, I think, after a certain period of time. When we were in sitting position, or if we visited a forward operating base that had artillery or mortars that had been in a sitting position for more than several weeks, you have to register the guns to the weather conditions, to all different things. So every now and then, forward observers were tasked to sit on an OP and watch rounds being fired. You could call it training, because we definitely utilized it to train up some of our younger Joes. And essentially what we're doing is firing rounds into Iraq while we were bored. I didn't understand until recently that white phosphorus is not supposed to be fired. It's not supposed to be used against civilian targets or civilian, et cetera. That's what we used as our training rounds in what were hasty impact areas in Iraq.
During your testimony, you talked about the use of white phosphorus mortar rounds.
Yeah, it's not to be used as a weapon. It's
Right.
supposed to be used for marking and incendiary.
Right.
And to me, the words were there, like incendiary, non-personnel, but there was something that didn't quite connect. So when I called for fire for Willie Pete, and we were just registering the guns and keeping them current, so it wasn't like I was calling on people, there was a disconnect, a cognitive dissonance that this weapon is not supposed to be being used except for specific purposes. And there's no fault but my own, but the training was not facilitated or instituted in a way that there was an awareness that there is a weight to what you're doing. And so I think a lot of that people kind of stumbled upon themselves when they had their first kill, or when they had to run over even animals, possibly children. I think that's where that moral awareness kind of snaps into focus, is after you've done something that was too much. I think that's where I was at.
During your testimony, you quoted Martin Luther King in a speech he made about the Vietnam War. Why did those words resonate with you?
Martin Luther King was a man of faith. In my mind, he was a prophet of the highest degree. He called our country to account on several occasions. It began with the civil rights, but as the Vietnam War grew, he began to speak out on that as well. And he said, I can't speak to the violence in our streets unless I address the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and it's our own government. And he did it because he loved America. I'm not an enemy of America. I grew up here. There's no amount of anything that can get the American out of me. And that involves a certain amount of pain for me as well, because I don't want to be doing what we're doing in Iraq. I'm for peace and security in Iraq. But unfortunately, the longer we stay there, the longer we withhold that from a sovereign country. I understand and realize the threat of us pulling out, but what we're doing has not worked for 5 years, and we need to try something different.
From Winter Soldier in Silver Spring, Maryland, this has been Matt Renner reporting for Truthout.org.